In this module, we'll be covering pesticides and the environment. So now we're going to talk about where pesticides go when they're released into the environment. Pesticides can move through the air, water, and soil. First and foremost, we want pesticides to move to their target. Once pesticides do the job intended, we want them to go away. Therefore, it's undesirable for pesticides to persist for long periods of time in the environment after they have accomplished their purpose. Runoff, leaching, drift, and movement with soil are all undesirable outcomes for pesticides. We'll look more closely at each of these. So, to cover point source and non-point source terms, you may have heard these. A point source contaminant can be traced back to a single location. Think of a spill incident, for example. An accident on the road with a spray rig and a pesticide contaminating a stream nearby is an example of this. Because the source can be determined to be a single location. More frequently, pesticides in agriculture are non-point source contaminants. This is because the pesticides are applied to large acreage. The source of the pesticide cannot be linked to anyone. The source of the pesticide can't be linked to any one location. For example, Roundup is applied to millions of acres of farmland in the US. So this graphic shows how pesticides can move through the environment. Keep in mind that as much as possible, we want the pesticide to reach the target and stay there. This example shows drift, which is the movement of the pesticide away from the target through the air. One form of pesticide drift is the movement of spray droplets away from the target. Drift also includes volatilization, or the loss of the pesticide in gaseous form. Pesticides that are volatile may be deposited on the target as droplets, then later in time move off the target as a gas, even after the spray droplet has dried. This is sometimes called gassing off. Volatile pesticides also gas off the surface of the soil. Volatile pesticides must be used with great care. Volatile soil-applied pesticides are usually lightly cultivated in the soil after treatment. Not all pesticides are volatile. The ability to volatilize is a function of the chemical structure of the pesticide. Runoff is another way that pesticides may escape into the environment. Runoff is the movement of pesticides with water away from the target across the surface of the soil. Pesticides that run off may contaminate surface waters, which include streams, lakes, and rivers. Leaching is the movement of pesticides downward through the soil profile. Pesticides that leach may end up in the groundwater, contaminating aquifers or wells. In this graphic, we see the yellow rectangles show different types of degradation that occur with pesticides. How long a pesticide lasts in the environment is called its persistence. A related term is residual, which usually indicates how long the material persists in the soil. But as shown here, pesticides eventually will break down in the environment. It would not be desirable for pesticides to persist in the environment after their purpose has been accomplished. We want them to do their job and then be broken down. So this shows the three primary ways that pesticides break down. Microbial degradation is breakdown by microorganisms. The microflora in the soil use the pesticide for food and break the pesticide molecule down into harmless substances. Second type, chemical degradation is breakdown by purely chemical processes. Hydrolysis, or breakdown by a reaction with water, is one of the more common chemical degradation pathways. Lastly, photodegradation is the breakdown by the action of sunlight. The tremendous energy in sunlight breaks molecules apart. Many pesticides are degraded this way and exposed on their soil surface. So to talk about some factors that influence drift, we will look at a couple different factors. The nature of the pesticide chemistry is important. As we already discussed, how drift can be either the movement of particles away from the target or the loss of the chemical as a gas. The pesticide's ability to volatilize is a function of its molecular structure. Pesticides vary greatly in their ability to volatilize. There's a much greater risk of this type of drift with pesticides that are highly volatile. Environmental factors that affect drift include wind speed and temperature. Wind speeds affects all kinds of drift. Higher wind speeds increases the risk of drift. Higher temperatures and lower relative humidity also increase the risk of drift. How you operate your sprayer has a huge effect on the potential for drift. Increasing your tractor speed and raising the boom height increase the risk of drift. Increasing the droplet size reduces your risk of drift. The larger the droplet, the faster the spray droplet falls to the ground, which reduces drift. You can increase your spray droplet size by increasing the nozzle size and or lowering your spray pressure. Now to discuss temperature inversions. These increase the risk of drift. Temperature inversions occur most often when warm days are followed by cool and clear nights. Under clear to partly cloudy skies, a surface inversion layer can form at sunset and can persist until morning into the next day when the sun heats the ground. When there's a temperature inversion, air near the ground is colder than the air above. Under low wind conditions, less than 30 miles per hour, this cold air layer persists because the cold air does not rise or mix with the warmer air above. If you spray during an inversion, the finer pesticide droplets can remain suspended in the air for a very long time. A pesticide cloud can move very slowly across the agricultural landscape and devastating to non-target areas nearby. Inversion layers dissipate sometime after sunrise as the sun warms the ground, and this causes the air layers to mix. When there's sufficient moisture in the air, the thermal inversion can be seen as a layer of fog near the ground, as seen in this photo. However, it's possible to have inversion conditions without fog. It is never a good idea to spray any pesticide under temperature inversion conditions. Some labels expressly prohibit it or will have language that says not to spray when wind speed is 0 to 2 miles per hour. To discuss some factors that influence runoff, which we covered is the movement of pesticides away from the target across the land. We want to talk about some different factors. Pesticide chemistry affects runoff. This has to do with the solubility of the pesticide and its ability to dissolve in water. The more soluble the chemical, the more likely it is to run off. The most important environmental factor is rainfall. Not only how much rain, but also the intensity in which it falls. Flash thunderstorms have the potential to cause much more runoff than a gentle rainfall that gives the soil more time to absorb the water. Site factors can have a big effect on runoff. The steep slope will be much more at risk for runoff than the full ground. The presence of buffers such as a vegetated filter strip will also slow down and trap pesticides, helping to prevent pesticides ending up in the surface water. Cover crops also slow down and trap chemicals, preventing their loss. Compaction is an important factor as well. Highly compacted soils are less permeable to water, and runoff will be increased. Finally, never apply chemicals to frozen or saturated soil. The risk of runoff is too great. Now to discuss leaching, which, if you remember, is the movement downward through the soil profile with water. Chemical property solubility is also important here, since it affects whether the pesticide dissolves in water. Another property of the pesticide that is affected by chemistry is the adsorption, retraction of the pesticide molecule to the soil particles. Pesticides that are strongly attracted to the small particles become bound and are less likely to leach. Rainfall is important to leaching because rainwater will carry the pesticide down through the soil horizon and potentially into the groundwater. As leaching occurs in the soil factors are also important. Highly permeable and less compacted soils are more at risk for leaching. Two other important soil factors include soil texture, which is the particle size of the soil, and its organic matter content. Both of these factors affect how much the pesticide can be absorbed in a soil and whether it will move through the soil profile. This table summarizes how the soil texture affects the movement of pesticides. If you remember, soil texture describes the particle size of the soil, with coarse textured soils being those that are high in sand and or silt, and very fine texture soils have high clay content. The very coarse textured soils are highly permeable because they have large particles and large pore spaces for water to move in. Water can move through them very quickly. Coarse textured soils, because the soils are big, particles are big, have much less surface area for absorption, and so they have less ability to absorb pesticides. They also tend to be lower in organic matter, which binds pesticides. Because water moves quickly through the soil and has less ability to bind the pesticides, very coarse soils have a higher risk of leaching. Some pesticides may not be used on coarse sandy soils because the risk of leaching is too great. Fine textured soil, on the other hand, is higher in clay content and has less pore space for water movement than a sandy soil. Permeability of this type of soil is much lower. Leaching is less likely in very finely textured soils, but runoff across the surface is greater because the water moves slowly into the soil. In terms of pesticide adsorption, the finer textured soils have much greater capacity to bind a pesticide. Fine textured soils may either be low or high in organic matter. When they're high in organic matter, this will also increase the capacity to absorb the pesticide. You may need to use a higher labeled rate of the pesticide in fine textured soils to compensate for the amount that binds to the soil. You should always consult the label. So to discuss pesticide movement with soil particles, this movement is called erosion. Pesticides that are bound to the soil, as well as nutrients, especially phosphorus, may be lost from farm fields via erosion. Fields with greater slope are more at risk to erosion. When soil particles reach the streams or rivers, they are called sediments. The contaminants in the sediments can be released into the water, causing environmental contaminations. Farmers can help prevent erosion through conservation tillage practices and the use of buffers to surface waters, such as vegetated filter strips. How do we protect our water resources in sensitive areas? As already discussed, the risk level to the environment with any pesticide will depend on the pesticide chemistry and characteristics of the site where you will use it. Another key factor is what sensitive areas may be nearby. In summary, the way you protect the environment is to closely read and follow the pesticide label precautions, as this has taken into account many of these factors. The most prevalent potential environmental risk with pesticides really concerns water resources. Many pesticide products are hazardous to aquatic organisms or cause other problems when they get into natural waters or the drinking supply. Sometimes it's not even the active ingredient that is of concern. It may be the adjuvants or the carrier in the pesticide formulation. So you want to make sure that you pay close attention for precautions on the label. Surface waters, which includes lakes, rivers, and streams, ditches, and field drains, carry water and need to be protected. Labels may have specific buffer requirements. You also want to look for precautions regarding groundwater. There may be restrictions or buffers required to areas where groundwater is shallow or where there will be sinkholes or wellheads. You may not be able to apply a chemical where soils are very permeable or where groundwater is close to the surface. Water resources that are most at risk are where concentrated chemicals may be used and stored. Never wash your chemical application equipment near any water resource, field drains, or ditches. Make sure that the tank and container rinsate is used according to the label. Make sure you dispose of pesticides and pesticide containers according to the label. Remember, if using a pesticide in wetlands, ditches, or areas containing water or near bodies of water, be certain that the product has these aquatic uses on the label. So how do we protect other sensitive areas? And what is a sensitive area? Sensitive areas can be almost anything that is potentially harmed by off-target application, including these sites. And included in these sites are water resources discussed in previous slides. Remember, the way you protect the environment is to closely read and follow the pesticide label precautions and make sure you are using it on a registered site. The pesticide you're using may have restrictions with respect to an endangered species habitat. It is the applicator's responsibility to know if endangered species habitats are in the vicinity. Pesticide risk is the primary risk with respect to sensitive crops and beekeepers. Some pesticides may require a downwind buffer to sensitive crops. Some of the new dicamba products require you to locate sensitive crop areas on your state's crop registry. Many herbicides now specify droplet size requirements, and you must use nozzles and spray pressures that keep you in the acceptable droplet size. Also, you want to be aware of any residential properties, schools, playgrounds, or medical facilities nearby. An example of a dicamba label is shown here, and it shows very specific sprayer operational requirements to prevent drift to sensitive areas. Remember, this is a legal requirement to follow these instructions. Pesticide labels will also explain the risks and precautions you must take to protect living organisms. Many insecticides are harmful to bees and other beneficial insects, and quite a few pesticides are harmful to aquatic organisms. Some pesticides also pose significant risks to higher organisms, such as birds and mammals. Aquatic organisms are among the most sensitive. Many, if not most, pesticide products will harm them. Many of the restrictions on pesticides used near water are designated to protect aquatic organisms. Pesticides that are hazardous to bees are clearly labeled as such, and the precautions concerning how and when you may make applications will be provided. You You must follow the Ohio pesticide laws with respect to bees. Pesticides that are hazardous to aquatic organisms often will have required buffered areas between treated areas and water features, or often may not be used near water at all. Potential hazard to endangered species will be indicated on the label, and it is the applicator's responsibility to know if an endangered species habitat is near and if they need to protect it. Birds are a species that are where birds are a situation where most species are protected by law. House sparrows, European starling, and common or rock pigeons are accepted and need to be controlled. As a summary, to protect the environment, you want to read and follow the label precautions carefully. You want to be certain that your use site is on the pesticide label. For example, if you plan to use the product in your woodlot, you cannot use this product label if it is labeled only for use in soybeans. Remember, it's against the law to use any product on a site that does not appear on the pesticide label. Also, be sure to look for any setback requirements from surface water wells and other bodies of water. A buffer zone may be required between you and your treatment area in a sensitive site. The Ohio Pesticide Crop Registry is intended to help pesticide applicators prevent drift to sensitive crops and apiaries. It is a free online registry that is part of a multi-state Field Watch registry, and it is made available to Ohio growers and professional applicators by the Ohio Department of Agriculture. All users register at fieldwatch.com. To use the tools, you must create an account. The use of FieldWatch and the related tools is completely voluntary. Pesticide applicators can use the FieldWatch application to locate sensitive specialty crops and beehives. Commercial specialty crop growers and beekeepers enter their locations of their crops and beehives using the DriftWatch application. Beekeepers also have a bee check tool to map their sites. All three applications are accessed via the FieldWatch website. So here we have an interactive quiz on how you would decrease drift. With each of these factors, we're going to go through what would result in less drift. First, wind speed. Would you want lower or higher wind speed? You would want lower because temperature inversions, you would want lower wind speeds, and this reduces drift in most situations. Temperature inversions would be the exception where the wind is 0 to 2 miles per hour. For boom speed and nozzle height, you would want lower to reduce the risk of drift. For driving or walking speed, would you want to decrease or increase? You would want to decrease to reduce drift. For droplet size, would you want to increase or decrease? You would want to increase. For nozzle aperture size, the size of the opening, would you want to increase or decrease? You would want to increase. This would give you a greater nozzle. This would give you a greater droplet size. Operating pressure, you would want to decrease nozzle, to decrease. This ends Module 4. You should take the quiz included in this module and the quiz in the course study guide.